That decoration is an overt and prejudicial appeal to emotion, Your Honor. I ask that the witness be instructed to remove it. We are here to discuss facts, not folklore. The words, slick with the easy arrogance of a man accustomed to winning arguments in sterile, predictable environments, echoed in the cavernous silence of the military tribunal chamber. Captain Evans, his uniform crisp, his posture a study in theatrical indignation, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist towards the woman in the witness box. The crowd, a mix of uniformed officers and civilian counsel, shifted uncomfortably. A few junior officers, eager to align with perceived authority, offered faint, nervous snickers that died almost instantly in the heavy, wood-paneled air. The object of his scorn, Lieutenant Commander Maya Rostova, did not react. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting one over the other on the polished rail of the witness stand. Her gaze was fixed not on the prosecuting attorney, who was attempting to publicly dismantle her credibility, but on the American flag standing sentinel to the judge's right. Her silence was not empty. It was a physical presence in the room, a void into which Evans's bluster disappeared without a trace. Her uniform was immaculate, but it was the simple, unadorned fabric of a working officer, not the tailored perfection of a career court-martialist like Evans. On her left breast, pinned just above the ribbons denoting years of unremarkable service, sat the deep, regal purple of the Purple Heart. It was this small, potent symbol of sacrifice that Evans had chosen as his point of attack. He saw a woman, wounded and therefore, in his limited calculus, weakened. He saw a decoration he assumed was a crutch, a prop to garner sympathy where facts might fail. He saw a quiet professional and mistook her calm for weakness, her stillness for fear. But Admiral Theron Vance, the presiding judge, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts and whose eyes held the weight of command, saw something else entirely. He didn't see the woman or the medal. He saw her posture. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible way her shoulders were aligned, not with the chair, but with the room's primary exit. He saw the economic stillness of her hands, a learned conservation of energy. He saw the steady, rhythmic cadence of her breathing, a physiological discipline that could not be taught in a law school. It was the posture of a person who was not merely present in a room, but who had already mapped it, measured it, and solved it. While Captain Evans saw a wounded officer, Admiral Vance saw a weapon at rest. If you believe that true strength is forged in silence and demonstrated through action, type respect below. Captain Evans, emboldened by the lack of a verbal counterattack, pressed his advantage, his voice rising with the self-satisfied cadence of a lecturer. Your Honor, the regulations are quite clear. Decorations that might unduly influence the perception of the court can be omitted. We are dealing with a complex issue of signals intelligence protocol, a matter of technical precision. Allowing this theatricality to remain serves only to distract from the objective truth. Is the witness here to testify about the encryption standards of the N/PRC 117G radio system, or is she here to solicit pity for an injury about which we have no context? An injury that could have been sustained falling down a flight of stairs at a desk job in Tampa. For all we know, the insult, now sharpened and specific, hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was painting a picture of her as a fraud, a paper pusher who had somehow been awarded a medal reserved for those who shed blood in the face of the enemy. He was leveraging the quiet nature of her service record, the many black lines of redaction and sealed mission logs, as proof of absence rather than evidence of significance. The jury, comprised of officers who understood the nuances of military honor, looked from Evans to Rostova, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning distaste. They were being asked to disrespect a symbol that every person in that room was sworn to revere. Yet, the lieutenant commander remained a statue of composure. Her expression did not flicker. Her breathing did not hitch. Her focus remained unbroken. She simply absorbed the attack, her silence a testament to a discipline forged in crucibles Evans couldn't even imagine. She methodically processed his words not as an insult, but as tactical information. He was revealing his strategy to define her by her perceived vulnerability, to make her a caricature of a wounded soldier. It was a common tactic, effective against those whose confidence was built on the validation of others. But her confidence was not built on anything external. It was forged in the absolute, empirical certainty of her own competence. The deep, resonant silence that followed Evans's tirade was finally broken by Admiral Vance. His voice was quiet, yet it carried the effortless authority of a battleship cutting through a calm sea. "Captain Evans, your point is noted. However, the witness will not be removing her decoration. Proceed with your actual questions regarding signals intelligence." The dismissal was cold, final, and absolute. It was a subtle but clear rebuke, a sign that the Admiral's patience was not infinite. Evans, momentarily thrown off balance, flushed a deep red, but recovered quickly, turning back to Rostova with a sneer. "Very well," he began. "Lieutenant Commander, please explain to the court, in simple terms, your role in Operation Nightfall." He thought he had her. He assumed her quietness meant she was unintelligent or unprepared. He expected a fumbling, uncertain answer. He was wrong. Her response, when it came, was as calm and precise as her posture. "I provided overwatch and real-time signals intelligence analysis for the primary assault team." The words were simple, direct, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the beginning of a refutation that would not require her to raise her voice once. The foundation of Evans's arrogance had begun to crack, though he was too blind to see it. He was a man arguing about the color of the sky with the storm itself. The demonstration of her skill was not to be a verbal sparring match, but an event of such profound and unexpected violence that it would forever alter the course of every life in that courtroom. It began not with a bang, but with a shuffle. A commotion at the back of the chamber, near the heavy oak doors. A man, gaunt and sweating, dressed in a mismatched civilian suit, had pushed past the bailiffs. He was shouting, his words a frantic, incoherent jumble about injustice and government conspiracies. He was holding a heavy, leather-bound briefcase to his chest like a shield. The two bailiffs, veterans of countless dull hearings, were caught flat-footed. They were accustomed to procedural objections, not physical intrusions. They moved toward the man, their hands instinctively going to their sidearms, their voices a mixture of command and uncertainty. "Sir, you need to calm down. Sir, step back." Their reaction was textbook and entirely wrong. They were escalating the situation, creating a focal point of confrontation that was drawing every eye in the room. Captain Evans, annoyed by the interruption to his grand performance, turned and shouted, "Get that man out of here." It was a foolish, arrogant command, one that poured gasoline on the fire. The intruder's eyes, wide and wild, locked onto the source of the shout. He saw Evans's pristine uniform, the symbol of the authority he despised, and his agitation spiked into pure rage. You're one of them," he screamed, and with a sudden, desperate movement, he swung the briefcase from his chest, revealing a device strapped to its underside. It was a crude but undeniably effective collection of wires, a battery pack, and several blocks of plastic explosive. A dead man's switch was clutched in his right hand. The courtroom froze. A collective, silent gasp sucked the air from the room. The bailiff stopped, their training screaming at them not to shoot a man with a dead man's switch. The jury members flattened themselves in their chairs. Captain Evans stood, paralyzed, his face a mask of disbelief and stark terror. His world of predictable rules and rhetorical victories had just been invaded by the brutal, chaotic reality of violence. He was no longer a prosecutor. He was a target. The entire sequence, from the first shout to the reveal of the device, took less than 4 seconds. For everyone else, time seemed to stop. But for Lieutenant Commander Maya Rostova, it was simply a problem set. In those 4 seconds, her mind, a highly trained combat computer, had already processed the entire scenario. She didn't see a crazed man. She saw vectors, angles, and probabilities. She noted the distance to the threat, 22 meters. She noted the two bailiffs, now liabilities, positioned directly in the line of fire between her and the target. She noted the panicked breathing of Captain Evans, a clear indicator of his imminent, unhelpful collapse. She calculated the probable blast radius of the device and identified the nearest points of cover for the judge and the jury. She registered the slight tremor in the bomber's hand, the sweat beading on his upper lip, the way his eyes darted from face to face, seeking a reaction. He was not a hardened zealot. He was desperate and terrified, which made him dangerously unpredictable. Her preparation was not a conscious thought, but a cascade of ingrained reflexes. A subtle shift in her weight from the balls of her feet to her heels. A slight drop in her center of gravity. A slow, almost imperceptible exhalation of breath to steady her heart rate. While the room was consumed by a tidal wave of panic, she was an island of absolute, chilling calm. The only movement she made was to slowly, deliberately, place her hands flat on the witness rail in front of her, a gesture of seeming surrender that was, in fact, the coiling of spring. She was not preparing to fight. She was preparing to end the fight before it began. Her silence was no longer passive, it was predatory. The intruder took a staggering step forward, his wild eyes fixing on the judge's bench. "This court is a lie. All of it," he shrieked, his voice cracking with a desperate fervor. That was the final piece of data Rostova needed. He was focused on the symbol of authority, Admiral Vance. This gave her an angle, a brief window of opportunity where his peripheral vision would be compromised. The bailiffs, still frozen in a standoff, began to raise their hands in a placating gesture. It was a fatal mistake, a signal of weakness that would only embolden him. Time, which had seemed to stop, now snapped forward. What happened next unfolded in a span of less than 2 seconds, a ballet of brutal efficiency that defied belief. Rostova exploded from the witness box. It was not the clumsy rush of a panicked person, but a fluid, impossibly fast movement, a blur of controlled violence. She didn't run towards the threat. She moved laterally, using the jury box as a barrier to break the intruder's line of sight. Her first step was silent. Her second step was a powerful launch from the balls of her feet. In a single, flowing motion, she vaulted over the low wooden barrier separating the gallery from the court, landing without a sound on the carpeted floor. She was no longer a witness. She was a hunter. The intruder, his attention locked on the judge, heard nothing. He saw only a flicker of movement in his periphery, a shadow where there should have been none. He began to turn, his thumb tightening on the dead man's switch. He was too slow. Rostova covered the remaining 15 meters in a heartbeat. Her path was not a straight line, but a weaving, unpredictable trajectory that made her an impossible target. As she closed the distance, she reached down and, in a movement too fast to follow, slipped off one of her regulation low-heel shoes. She was not disarming herself. She was choosing her weapon. In the final 2 meters, she didn't slow down. She accelerated. She didn't aim for the man's chest or his head. She aimed for the fulcrum of his balance. She slid the final meter on the polished floor, her body low, a human projectile of focused intent. Her shoulder struck the man's knee at a precise angle, shattering the joint and buckling his leg instantly. Simultaneously, the shoe in her hand, held by the heel, became a hardened instrument. She brought it up in a devastatingly precise arc, striking the ulnar nerve in his wrist. The jolt of pure, excruciating pain caused an involuntary spasm. His hand flew open. The dead man's switch, its connection broken, clattered harmlessly to the floor. The entire sequence was a symphony of applied physics and brutal anatomy, executed with the passionless precision of a surgeon. The intruder crumpled to the ground, his body folding in on itself in a heap of broken joints and agony. Rostova didn't stop. She landed over him, one knee pinning his back to the floor, her free hand securing his other arm in a disabling lock. With her other hand, she calmly reached down, scooped up the disarmed trigger, and held it up for the stunned bailiffs to see. Then, she simply waited, her breathing as even and calm as it had been in the witness box. The aftermath was a deafening, absolute silence. The only sound was the ragged, pained gasps of the neutralized bomber on the floor. The bailiffs stood, their sidearms half drawn, their faces slack with awe and incomprehension. The jury stared, their minds unable to process the seamless transition from quiet witness to elite operator. And Captain Evans, who had been the target of the intruder's initial rage, had stumbled backward, collapsing into his chair. His face was ashen, his mouth agape. He stared at the woman, now calmly kneeling on the floor, the disarmed trigger in her hand, and in his eyes, for the first time, was not arrogance, but a profound and terrifying respect born of pure shock. He had demanded she remove a symbol of her sacrifice. In response, she had just demonstrated, in the most visceral way imaginable, exactly how she had earned it. The quiet professional had spoken, and her language was action. The silence held for a long, suspended moment before Admiral Vance's voice, like the crack of a gavel, brought the room back to reality. Bailiffs, secure the prisoner and remove the device. Clear the courtroom. All non-essential personnel out. Now, his voice brooked no argument. It was the voice of a man who had witnessed chaos before and knew how to impose order upon it. Uniformed security flooded the room, their movements now swift and professional, as if shamed by their earlier hesitation. They swarmed the subdued intruder, cuffing him and carefully removing the briefcase containing the explosive device. Paramedics followed, attending to the man's shattered knee. Through it all, Lieutenant Commander Rostova remained kneeling, a placid center in the swirling storm of activity, until one of the bailiffs, a grizzled master-at-arms with 3 decades of service, approached her. He looked down at her, then at the trigger she still held, and simply said, "Ma'am, we have it." Rostova looked up, gave a single, brief nod, and placed the trigger in his outstretched hand. She then rose to her feet in a single, smooth motion, her posture once again perfect, her uniform barely mussed. She retrieved her shoe, slipped it back on, and walked back to the witness stand, her steps measured and calm. She sat down, placed her hands one over the other on the rail, and fixed her gaze back on the American flag. It was as if nothing had happened. Once the room was cleared of everyone but the core legal teams, the bailiffs, and the judge, Admiral Vance fixed his gaze on her. The look in his eyes was no longer just one of professional respect. It was one of deep, personal recognition. He leaned forward, his voice low and resonant, pitched so only she and the council could hear. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, the formality of his tone imbued with a new weight. "I have seen that takedown sequence before. Only once. It was a demonstration at Dam Neck years ago. They called it the Echo Disarm. It was developed for single-operator interdiction in high-threat, non-permissive environments. They told us it was purely theoretical, that the level of skill and speed required was almost inhuman." He paused, letting his words sink in. Captain Evans, still pale, listened, his world shrinking with every syllable the Admiral uttered. Vance continued, his eyes locked on Rostova's. There was only one operator certified to execute it in a live scenario. Her call sign was Echo. He let the name hang in the air for a moment. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Rostova's response was characteristically brief. "Yes, Admiral." The confirmation, quiet as it was, landed in the courtroom like a thunderclap. Admiral Vance nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on his face. He turned to his secure terminal, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced speed. He bypassed the standard JAG legal database and accessed a far more restricted network, one that required multiple levels of clearance. A file appeared on his screen, heavily redacted, its classification markings glowing in stark red letters. "Top secret ///SCI." He looked from the screen back to the woman in the witness box, and then he turned his formidable gaze upon Captain Evans. The transformation was complete. He was no longer a judge in a tribunal. He was a fleet admiral, and a junior officer had just committed a profound transgression in his presence. His voice dropped, losing all its previous judicial restraint, replaced now by the cold, hard authority of high command. "Captain Evans," he said, his voice like chipping ice. "You stand here in a climate-controlled room, protected by the rule of law, and you question the honor of a warrior. You, a man whose only battles have been fought with paper and procedure, presume to understand the nature of sacrifice." He gestured to the screen that only he could see. "I am looking at Lieutenant Commander Rostova's unredacted service record, or what little of it the system will even allow a man of my rank to see." He began to read, his voice a staccato rhythm of devastating revelations. "Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The operational element of what you civilians call SEAL Team 6. Her entire service history is one long, black line of classified deployments. Combat hours, over 4,000. Medals, Bronze Star with Valor, Silver Star, the Navy Cross." He paused, letting the weight of that award settle in the room. "And yes, Captain, the Purple Heart, the citation for which is sealed by executive order. Do you know what that means, Captain? It means the circumstances under which she was wounded are so sensitive to national security that even the story of her own heroism is a state secret." He leaned back, his eyes boring into Evans, stripping away every shred of the man's professional vanity. "You demanded she remove a medal. That medal was pinned on her by the President of the United States in a classified ceremony at a secure facility. She received the injury that earned it while single-handedly neutralizing a hostile intelligence operative who had breached the perimeter of a forward operating base. The same base, I might add, from which the signals intelligence you're currently prosecuting this case with was being broadcast. She wasn't just in the fight, Captain. She was the reason the fight could continue. She was the reason that data survived. She was the reason the primary assault team for Operation Nightfall, the very mission you question her about, didn't walk into a catastrophic ambush." Admiral Vance slowly rose to his full, imposing height. He stood ramrod straight and faced the witness box. In a gesture of profound, almost shocking respect that violated all courtroom protocol, he brought his hand up in a slow, perfect salute. "Lieutenant Commander Rostova," he said, his voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "Your honor is not in question in this courtroom. Thank you for your service." He held the salute, a 4-star admiral paying tribute to a junior officer, an act that spoke more loudly than any verdict ever could. Captain Evans could only watch, his arrogance incinerated, his reputation reduced to ashes. He had mistaken silence for weakness and had just been taught a brutal lesson in the true meaning of competence. The story of what happened in Admiral Vance's courtroom did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the secure email servers of the JAG Corps like a shockwave, a cautionary tale passed in hushed, reverent tones. It was recounted over beers at the officers' club and whispered in the hallways of the Pentagon. The legend of the quiet lieutenant commander who had dismantled a bomber with a shoe and a prosecutor with her silence became institutional folklore overnight. For the bailiffs who had been present, it became a defining moment of their careers. The master-at-arms who had taken the trigger from her hand became a minor celebrity in his own right, forced to retell the story dozens of times. He always ended it the same way. "I've seen brave men, and I've seen skilled men. I've never seen anything like her." It was like watching a ghost move. There 1 second, gone the next, and then it was just over. The transcript of the hearing, heavily redacted, became known informally as the Rostova transcript. Junior lawyers studied it, not for its legal precedents, but as a lesson in humility, a stark reminder that the person sitting in the witness box might be infinitely more capable than the one questioning them. For Captain Evans, the aftermath was a swift and brutal fall from grace. He was not formally reprimanded. Admiral Vance knew that public shame was a far more potent punishment. Evans was quietly reassigned to a dreary administrative post in a forgotten corner of the naval bureaucracy, a place where ambitious careers went to die. The humiliation broke him, but it also, in time, remade him. The shell of his arrogance was shattered, and what was left was a man forced to confront the profound depth of his own ignorance. Months later, a young ensign, fresh out of law school and nervous on her first assignment, was tasked with briefing a now graying Captain Evans. She fumbled her papers, her voice trembling slightly. The old Evans would have eviscerated her for her incompetence. The new Evans simply waited patiently. When she finished, he looked at her, not with condescension, but with a weary kindness. "Good brief, ensign," he said quietly. "Don't ever assume you know who you're talking to. Just do your job and treat everyone with respect. It's the only thing that matters." It was the closest he could come to an apology, a lesson learned in the crucible of public disgrace, now passed on as wisdom. Lieutenant Commander Rostova, meanwhile, deflected the sudden, unwanted fame with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything else. She finished her testimony with the same calm, technical precision she had begun it with, her contribution proving decisive in the outcome of the tribunal. When reporters tried to approach her outside the courthouse, she slipped away through a side exit, disappearing back into the shadows from which she had emerged. She was not interested in accolades or recognition. Her reward was the successful completion of the mission. A few weeks after the hearing, she was seen on a training base, not in a classroom, but on the pistol range. She was mentoring a young sailor, a female communications specialist who was struggling to qualify. Rostova didn't lecture her on stance or grip. Instead, she spoke quietly about breathing. "Don't fight the weapon," she said, her voice barely a whisper over the distant pop of gunfire. "Become quiet inside. Find the silence. The shot is already there. Your job is just to let it go." She placed a hand on the young sailor's shoulder, a simple, grounding gesture. The sailor took a deep breath, found her focus, and fired. A perfect bullseye. Rostova gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was her legacy. Not in the headlines, but in the quiet moments of mentorship, passing on a philosophy where competence was the only creed and silence was the ultimate expression of strength. The ripple effect of that day continued to expand, creating a legend that would far outlast the careers of those involved. The shoe she had used, a simple, black, regulation low heel, was never found. Some joked it had been taken to the evidence locker and tagged as a weapon of mass destruction. Others whispered that she had simply put it back on and walked away, its extraordinary purpose served. A photograph, a grainy still taken from the courtroom security camera, was anonymously pinned to the bulletin board in the main briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado. It showed a blurry image of Rostova, mid-motion, a fluid phantom of action against the backdrop of panicked stillness. Beneath it, someone had scrawled a single word, "Echo." It became a touchstone for new recruits, a silent reminder of the standard they were expected to meet. The location in the courtroom, where she had taken the bomber down, became an unofficial landmark. Bailiffs would point it out to new personnel. "That's the spot," they'd say. That's where the Echo disarm happened. The story became a teaching tool, a parable about the dangers of assumption. It was a stark illustration that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice the least. The legend of Maya Rostova became a part of the institutional identity of the silent service, a testament to the ethos of the quiet professional. Her name was never mentioned in official histories, her greatest victories forever sealed behind walls of classification. But her story lived on in the culture, a powerful undercurrent of inspiration. It served as a reminder that honor isn't found in the volume of one's voice, but in the integrity of one's actions. It reinforced the idea that respect is not a commodity to be demanded, but a tribute that is earned through undeniable competence. The humbled figure of Captain Evans served as the counterpoint, a ghost to haunt the arrogant, a warning that prejudice and ego are terminal weaknesses in a world that demands professionalism. His quiet reassignment was a more powerful deterrent than any court-martial could ever be. It was a living example of professional death, a slow fade into irrelevance. Rostova herself never acknowledged the legend. To her, the event in the courtroom was not a moment of heroism. It was simply a Tuesday. It was the execution of a trained response to a clear and present danger. The fact that it happened in a courtroom in front of an audience was irrelevant. The principles were the same whether she was in the mountains of Afghanistan or the halls of justice in Washington, D.C. Assess, adapt, act. Her quietness was not a personality trait. It was a tactical advantage. It allowed her to observe while others were posturing, to process while others were panicking. It was the ultimate camouflage, allowing her to exist in a state of readiness, unseen and underestimated, until the precise moment action was required. Her legacy was not the single dramatic event, but the unwavering philosophy that underpinned it. A year later, Admiral Vance was giving a commencement address at the Naval Academy. He spoke of courage, honor, and commitment. Towards the end of his speech, he looked out at the sea of bright, eager faces in their crisp white uniforms, and he told them a story. He didn't use names or locations. He simply told them about a quiet warrior who was judged by her appearance and insulted for a medal she had earned in blood. He told them how she had responded not with words, but with a perfect demonstration of skill under pressure, saving dozens of lives through her silent competence. He told them how a high-ranking officer had saluted her, an acknowledgement that true rank is not always reflected on the collar. He looked at the young midshipman and delivered his final point. "Your greatest weapon," he told them, his voice resonating across the field, "will not be your rifle or your ship. It will be your character, the quiet competence you build when no one is watching, the integrity you maintain when you think no one will know. Do not seek validation. Seek excellence. The respect that matters will follow." In the back of the crowd, leaning against an old oak tree, stood a woman in civilian clothes. She watched the admiral speak, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. Then, as the cadets rose to their feet in a thunderous ovation, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the afternoon sun, her work, as always, done in silence. The story of that day in the courtroom has now passed into the realm of myth, a foundational text for a new generation of warriors and leaders. Years have passed. Captain Evans is long retired, a cautionary tale whispered to overeager lieutenants. Admiral Vance's speech is now required reading for ethics classes at the Academy. And Lieutenant Commander Maya Rostova, her name remains a ghost in the system, her true accomplishments locked away in secure servers, destined to remain unknown to the public she so faithfully protected. But her impact, the true measure of her legacy, is not found in any official file. It lives on in the culture of quiet professionalism she embodied. It is present in the young ensign who now, as a commander, treats every subordinate with dignity, remembering the lesson taught by a humbled captain. It is present in the Special Forces operator who practices not just marksmanship, but the discipline of stillness and observation, knowing that the battle is often won before the first shot is fired. It is present in the sailor on the pistol range who, when struggling, remembers the quiet words of a legendary mentor. Become quiet inside. Find the silence. True legacy is not a statue in a park or a name on a building. It is not what you leave behind, but what continues forward. It is the standards you set, the principles you live by, and the quiet competence that inspires others to be better than they thought they could be. The story of Echo Rostova became a living principle, a reminder that the world is not saved by those who shout the loudest, but by the quiet professionals who, without fanfare or need for recognition, simply get the job done. Her silence was her testimony, her actions were her verdict, and her legacy is the enduring standard of excellence she left in her wake, a standard that continues to call others to a higher form of service, one defined not by the medals on your chest, but by the unwavering strength of your character. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.